everybody. My name is Aleksandra Rachitskaya. I'm from Cleveland Clinic Call Institute, and it's my pleasure to participate today in the new Retina Radio Journal Club that we're doing together with VBS. During this Journal Club discussion, we bring to you papers that have been recently published, and we talk about topics that, in my opinion, affect everybody's care of our retina patients. And today, I'm joined by my West Coast colleagues and friends, and I'm going to introduce each one of them. So we'll start with Mrinali Gupta. Mrinali practices at Retina Associates of Orange County, California. Mrinali, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having us.
Awesome. And next, we have Eric Nudleman. Eric is from Shiley Eye Institute at UC San Diego. Eric, how are you?
Doing great. Hi, Aleksandra. Great to be here.
Awesome. And we also have with us today Aris Thanos. He's at Legacy Devers Eye Institute in Portland, Oregon. Aris, good to have you as well.
Aleksandra, great to be here.
Awesome. So today we're going to discuss one of the studies that we found interesting. We're going to summarize the study and then follow that by discussion. So let's start off today. We're going to talk about end of study results for LETTER phase 2 trial of the port delivery system with Ranibizumab for neovascular age-related macular degeneration. So as you might know, we had the primary results already published. This is a paper that is pre-proof and is coming out from Ophthalmology Retina. And it was published, it was written by Arshad Kanani and LETTER investigators. So I'm gonna pass it on to Eric to summarize the paper for us.
Great, thanks very much, Aleksandra. So I'm gonna briefly summarize the paper. This is a phase 2 clinical trial that evaluated the port delivery system for the treatment of wet AMD. So patients were randomized 3 to 3 to 3 to 2 to receive either the low dose port delivery system with Ranibizumab, that was at 10 milligrams per mil, the middle dose, which was 40 milligrams per mil, or the high dose, which was 100 milligrams per mil, and those were compared to monthly intravitreal injections of Ranibizumab. 220 patients were enrolled, and they had to have shown a response to anti-VEGF therapy. What that meant was they had to have 2 or more injections, but less than 9 of an anti-VEGF, and had to have shown about a 50 micron or more reduction in their central subfoveal thickness, or stabilized or improved visual acuity. The end of study results were the time to first refill of the port delivery system, or the mean change in their best corrected visual acuity and central subfoveal thickness from baseline, and of course the safety outcomes. So here's the top line outcomes. In the high dose group, the median time to refill was 15.8 months. In the high dose group, about 60%, it was 59% of patients went longer than 1 year before they needed a refill. And at month 22, patients lost a few letters in the low and medium dose group, it was 4.6 and 2.3 respectively. But the high dose group gained mean letters of 2.9, which was similar in the gains of the Ranibizumab group, which was 2.7. There were really no new safety concerns to worry about compared to those that were already published. The main things were the vitreous hemorrhages that were early on in the study until they changed the protocol, and some issues with with conjunctival erosion, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and a few infections. But other than that, the final results, which were published here, there were really no new safety concerns. So just to summarize here, the conclusion was that the port delivery system was non-inferior to monthly Ranibizumab, particularly in the high dose group, which was the data that led to the phase 3 trial, which was Archway.
So Eric, that's a great summary, and we'll talk probably a little bit more when we discuss the paper, since now we have even results, some of the primary results of the Archway. But talking about this publication, this end of study results, maybe I can ask Mrinali on her first impressions and kind of what you thought about after reading this paper.
Yeah, I think that the first impressions are that it's compelling, that it's consistent with the 9-month data that we had seen earlier. And this is, of course, it's a phase 2 trial with some limitations, although it was large and randomized. And it's great that we controlled against our gold standard for wet AMD with monthly ranibizumab. It wasn't a mass study. And the refill criteria and things like that were very quantitative, which aren't really how we practice clinically, where we look qualitatively at an OCT scan and assess for fluid changes and specifically where the fluid is. But nonetheless, this is a phase 2 study that was laying the groundwork for the future Archway trial along the same lines. We had to contend with the realities of the changing surgical procedure, just learning how to implant this device and how that changed outcomes over time. And of course, the study population that we're looking at is a group that has milder wet AMD and has demonstrated response. So extrapolating to how that might apply to the broader population is a question that I think we all wonder about.
So Mrinali, that was a great perspective. I'll pass it on to Aris. What do you think those results mean to you as you think of your clinical practice?
I think these are all very exciting results because we know that there is a gap between the visual outcomes and the visual gains that patients with AMD have in clinical trials versus real world. So that, and we know also that the high treatment burden for AMD and these frequent injections, these frequent visits are one of these limitations, and especially in light of this recent pandemic. Having a sustained delivery system of medication that may bridge that gap and also help with other issues like access to care, caregivers being burdened to bring their loved ones to the appointments every month, and certainly again this is very, very exciting.
Well, I share your enthusiasm, and I think, as you mentioned, there's such a big unmet need when it comes to taking care of these patients. And we'll talk a little bit more after we take a break. But I have to tell you, just seeing patients in clinic that I've been treating for neovascular AMD and mention to them that there might be something coming where they won't need to come see me every month, has been generating a lot of excitement. I always get the line, I like coming to see you, but I really don't like getting the injections. So let's revisit in a little bit more detail after we take this little break. Welcome back. We're back with the new Retina Radio Journal Club with VBS. I'm Aleksandra Rachitskaya, and I'm joined here today with Mrinali Gupta, Eric Nudleman, and Aris Thanos. So before we went on break, Eric nicely summarized the results of the paper we're discussing. This is the end study results of letter 2. And some of the outcomes were pretty impressive. So what do you guys think of these results?
I was quite impressed, particularly with the high dose group. The fact that some of the patients didn't need a refill for over a year is quite encouraging, and the fact that their visual gains were maintained for the duration of the study and were comparable to monthly anti-VEGF therapy, ranibizumab therapy. It certainly is intriguing, and I'm excited for the official results of the Archway trial. The Archway trial, as I'm sure you guys are all aware, had a fixed refill procedure at 6 months. So if that's what ultimately the FDA approves, to be able to treat patients every 6 months would be a big step forward for our field.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting, you know, it's always interesting to me when the trials get designed, how you transition from phase 2, where there was particular kind of retreatment criteria. And as Mrinali mentioned, it might not be really the retreatment criteria that we're used to, because there was some tolerance for fluid, to a phase 3. And I know some of you on this podcast have participated in phase 3, and that mandated 6 months refill. And Eric, as you mentioned, there was a presentation at ASRS this summer about the results of Archway, and it was shown that primary results, it was non-inferior. PDS was non-inferior to monthly ranibizumab. But as we look at these trials, and let's go back to the paper we're discussing, you know, there have been some safety concerns. Obviously, PDS is a surgical procedure. So what do you guys think about this safety? Should we be worried? And do you think it's, you know, when you talk to a patient and you can send them now for surgery to treat the neovascular AMD, what kind of conversation are you going to have with them?
You know, I think the two most compelling concerns from a safety standpoint are the vitreous hemorrhage and the endophthalmitis. It seems from the study that a majority of the vitreous hemorrhage events occurred before optimization of the surgical procedure. And although there were some subsequent to that, most were not serious vitreous hemorrhages. So that's compelling, but I think we're all eager to see in the next trial, in the Archway trial, really how this vitreous hemorrhage story plays out, as I'm sure the surgeons who are doing the implants and who have been learning this optimized technique are just getting better and better at it as well. There might be a learning curve. The specific things that are involved in this study are not the typical things we do in most of our studies in terms of the implant procedure, which seems simple, but I think it sounds like it needs to be done in a very specific way to mitigate that hemorrhage risk. The other concern, of course, is the endophthalmitis risk. And you know, there were 3 cases, only one of which was in the immediate post-op period. The other 2 happened subsequently, and one of those was due to conj retraction. So I think we all wonder about conj complications, exposure, erosion of the implant through the conj. Is this something that you will avoid in patients with glaucoma who might be facing glaucoma surgeries down the road, or a bad ocular surface, or any of those things? Because 3 cases of endophthalmitis, although all were culture negative, is something that makes us all take pause.
So Mrinali, totally agree with your comments. And it's interesting because I think the conjunctiva issue is a real one. You know, in most of our surgeries that we do when we deal with conjunctiva, we might not be as retina surgeons as careful with it as maybe our glaucoma counterparts. And here, conjunctiva closure, tenons and conjunctiva closure is really, really important because there is a risk of erosion. So, you know, as we think about all these aspects, right? We have a surgery, we have a refill. So, if Aris, what do you think about how is this going to translate? If you know, if this approach gets approved, how is it going to translate into your practice?
Yes. So, with regards to my practice, first of all, I'm sharing a lot of patients, or let's say we have concomitant glaucoma procedures that have superior filtering blebs or superior temporal tubes. And unfortunately, these patients who at this point, they won't be able to have this implant. I'm curious. I think these are the patients that I think that they're going to hear that unfortunately they don't qualify for that. And I agree that that as retina specialists now, especially with this device, we have to be very, very meticulous with taking care of the conjunctiva and closing tenons with the insertion of this this implant. And also we have to think about that a significant number of those injections are being performed by sometimes by comprehensive ophthalmologists. This percentage within the country may go up to 15 to 20%. So, that will translate to an additional patient population that retina specialists will have to take care of.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when we think about the ideal patient, obviously we're looking at trial and there is a lot of exclusion and inclusions, but that's not what happens in your clinic. You can't, you have all kind of variety of patients, like you mentioned, glaucoma patients. And maybe Eric, I'll ask you, what do you think is the ideal patient who is going to benefit the most from this approach?
The patient that's tired of getting injections. I think this is going to be largely driven by the patient. Obviously, they're going to have to be aware of the potential risks and what we're going to have to explain to them what the surgical procedure entails. And I agree with both of you that patients that have a risk of glaucoma or have had glaucoma surgery are not ideal candidates. But there are many patients that are fed up with having frequent injections, or they have to travel long distances, or they just are not interested in having frequent therapy for whatever reason. But we know that they require them, and I think those are going to be the patients where a surgical option, where they can come in quarterly or even twice a year, perhaps, for a refill procedure, would benefit the most.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Eric says. I think that the patient who needs to get injections more frequently than they want to, or more frequently than they're able to, will be a great candidate. And of course, I probably won't be super excited initially to do these in an anticoagulated patient, or as you guys mentioned, patients with glaucoma or conj issues or really terrible ocular surface health. But the other thing that's interesting is that the study looked at people who have a demonstrated response to anti-VEGF, and that might be the people we initially look to implant this. But there have been some studies, I think Demetrius Vavis recently published in Ophthalmology Retina, that some people who we call non-responders are actually short-term responders. So 2/3 of them are just responding sooner than 4 weeks. So if you bring them in at 2 or 3 weeks, and I think we've all seen patients where we're not sure if they're responding, but if you bring them in a little sooner, you see a response. And these patients might be really ideal candidates for this, because if you're doing the standard thing of having them come back in 4 weeks and you think there's no response, there's probably a subset where if you bring them in at 2 or 3 weeks, they are responding and they'd be an ideal candidate for a continuous ranibizumab implant like this.
So I agree with everything you guys have said. This is very exciting. Obviously, there is a huge unmet need in all the populations that we take care of who require frequent injections. And I think it's going to be interesting to see results as they come out. We talked a little bit about archway results. There's ongoing studies in diabetic macular edema and diabetic retinopathy. And obviously the patients who have been implanted, or patients even who are randomized to standard of care, are given an option to have an implant and continue in Portal study, which collects a long-term data. So as we get long-term data in terms of safety and visual outcomes, there's discussions, and we can talk probably endlessly on this topic, discussions about geographic atrophy. We'll have much more information as time goes on. But I agree with you. This is exciting, and I think it's really neat that we've all been practicing for about the same amount of time. And if you think back to your fellowship, this was not something that we were even discussing with the patients, and it might be a reality in the near future. So I appreciate you taking the time and discussing this important topic. And I thank the audience for listening to this journal club that's brought to you by New Retina Radio and BBS. And thank you so much, and please stay tuned for our future episodes.